Okay, so this is a small supplemental video to the graph that we just did. I noticed that there were a few things that I didn't cover in there and I had overlooked there at the end of the script that I follow for this. Some of the stuff that we definitely want to do before printing this off, the graph itself is not necessarily in the best condition for making it look good. One of the things that I may have mentioned in there is that I forgot to put some units on that, which is a big no-no. You should never make a graph without indicating the units, even if you've got a title like position versus time. So let's get this looking a little bit better. Now, the default graph that we have right here that I showed you how to make with the equation on there is for the most part enough to get the job done, but again, we want it to look a little bit better. Now remember when I went through over here and I actually set it to show me 3 decimal places so that I could clear up these numbers a little bit more? Well, the problem is now it's giving me 3 decimal places on this graph and it looks a little off. So let's start there. I've left-clicked on the graph so that I'm selecting it. You can see the stuff surrounding it. Now I'm going to left-click on the numbers over here that make the y-axis. Okay, when I do that, it puts a little outline there. And then I can right-click and I go down to Format Axis. And it brings up an option over here. Now this is in the newest version of Excel, at least as far as I know. Maybe a newer version has come out and they've changed it a little bit. So it may not be in the exact same place for all of the versions you're using. But what we're looking for is Format Axis. A lot of times you can access it by right-clicking somewhere on the graph or on the axis itself. Sometimes you have to right-click on the line of the axis, I think in older versions. There are a lot of options here. Some really good ones too. I can actually reset my minimum value for, I've selected my y-axis here, so I could change it where instead of going at 0, maybe negative 0.1. And you'll notice now it puts the bottom thing that it has listed at negative 0.1. However, I'm just going to leave that at 0 because 0 is good for what I want. 1.6 is actually a pretty good value. It leaves me a little bit of space at the top, but I could eliminate that extra space and put 1.4 for instance. Although it looks like I have at least one data point that goes a little bit higher. So 1.6 is great. Usually the automatic stuff is actually pretty good on this. You can also control where the other axis, the horizontal, actually crosses it. Right now we've got it at 0, but maybe I want it. Sometimes you're going to have negative numbers and you might want it down beneath that. So you could do something like, well, in this case I'll do 0.4. And now you'll see that it's moved the x-axis up to 0.4. I could also have it at negative 0.1, and that would move it down, although right now it may be having a problem with that because my graph doesn't actually go down that far. Either way, I'm going to put that back to 0, or I can just select automatic as necessary. Maximum axis value. There are a lot of options that you can play around with here. As you go down, there are, again, a bunch of things you can play around with. Feel free to explore them some, see if you can get your graph looking a bit better. But the main one that we actually want, and these may actually be hidden when you first get to them, might look like something like this. You can get them to pop up by pressing that little arrow. We're mainly looking for number. Somewhere in here it'll have number, decimal places, or you could do, general, accounting, scientific. But in this case, general sounds good. And what I'd like to do, given the markings on here, I'm going to clean it up a little bit and tell it just go to 1 decimal point. And instead of 1.6000 or whatever it was, I'm now down to only 1.6. And that looks good, 0.4. I can read the graph. It doesn't seem as cluttered. It's a bit nicer to read. So go with that. Okay, so that one looks good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing to the x-axis. I can left-click down here on one of the numbers, and I get that to show up. I'm going to right-click and go to Format Axis. Again, I could play around with all these different settings, control where it crosses, where the y-axis crosses it, for instance. But the thing I'm looking for is going to be number yet again. I'm going to put it down to 1. I think 1 would do. Maybe 2 might be nice, but I think 1 will be fine. And now we've got 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. Those are all looking good. All right. So here's one that's a bit different in this version, and it took me a little while to hunt it down. But a lot of times in the right-click that you can do, you can find maybe in Format Chart area, or I think there's usually one that says Chart Options. you can go in there and you can find something like axis titles. Here in the latest version, however, there's a plus sign right here that lets you access the chart elements, in other words, the chart options. Axes, and here's one, axis titles. So I can click that and bring these in. And now that I have these in, I can actually click over here, and this was my position, so my units should be in meters, M. And then down here, I can click on axis title. Left click, draw over it. Basically, it's just a text box that you can play with. This one is in time, and that is seconds, S. And there we go. Now, I have myself a very good and well done graph. It's very easy to read. The numbers don't have a bunch of extra decimal points on there that are a little distracting. It's very easy on the eyes. And most importantly, I have my units, so I know exactly what units I'm using. This is also where we'll end up getting the units for things like our acceleration, our initial velocity, or our initial position, as it may be. Now, one of the final things that you can do, so you don't necessarily have to write your name on it, you could also come up here to the chart title and put something like Mr. Sanchez's position versus time. And then if you click outside of where the text is, I think you should be able to drag this a little bit over so that it's not, there we go, so it's not in the way of our equation, which I dragged up there. When you make the equation, a lot of times it starts down here. We just drag it up to the top or somewhere where it's out in the open. Now, if I were to print this, notice how I've got it selected. I can do Control P, and then this is what it would look like on the page. And so it looks fine, has my name, tells me it's position versus time. We have our best fit line equation right here. We've got our units, and all of the numbers are looking pretty good. I'm not actually going to print this because I don't have a printer connected to this computer, but that gets you all set, and that is a wonderful graph to have printed up and ready to go. Okay?